Hello?
Jill, are you okay?
Brad, is that you?
Listen, you gotta get out of there.
What are you talking about?
I don't have time to explain. You gotta get out of there right now.
All right, let me grab my...
I want to talk to you about Resident Evil 3 Remake. With Capcom's release of Resident Evil 2 Remake, appeasing the old school and new school fans, they nailed so many things that deem it a faithful retelling of Resident Evil 2. Resident Evil, as you all know, started off as a survival horror and eventually became action horror. Resident Evil 3 to me is a hell ride. You're escaping this mutant monster from a city thrown into undead chaos, human sacrifice and desperation. Resident Evil to me is a fantasy of what could really happen in real life if we become careless in biological advances and military greed. When I was 8 years old, Resident Evil 2 was released, and I watched the intro only. I didn't have the heart to play because I was that terrified. After seeing the intro, in, for that time, amazing graphics, it made an unforgettable impression on me as a person, as a child. I learned very quickly that it's okay to be afraid of monsters, but you have to overcome them. Make survival decisions to fight your fears. In a Resident Evil game, you can expect initial horror, and then action, unforgettable characters and monsters, evil organizations, military greed, and the core biological science gone wrong. The opening into Resident Evil 3 Remake in live action was well made, but it felt too close to the abomination that is the live action movies. I would have appreciated a non-live action intro, but we know Capcom love their live action in Resident Evil games. Resident Evil 3 feels rushed. Resident Evil 2 Remake feels better paced and fleshed out. Resident Evil 3 Remake is still very good, I just wish there was more content. It pushed on fluidity. It catered to runners, especially the finesse runners. City section could have been expanded with more in-between building segments. Nemesis chasing you through more of the city would have been amazing. More NPCs dotted around, stranded, asking for help, rewarding you since the outbreak has just happened. Maybe in future DLC to have resistant survivors in story mode to aid you. Resident Evil 3 Remake pacing was as if following on from Mansion Incident. Jill is now experienced and can handle the hell ride that the roller coaster launchpad Resident Evil 2 Remake had set out. Now, in Resident Evil 3 Remake, you're locked in intense pace. The knife in Resident Evil 3 Remake is now unbreakable, which I would have liked to have an optional breakable knife to make it harder without adding in more enemies. The enhanced evade action is so fitting of Jill and Carlos. Being combat experienced, it is great to see them put it to use. The zombies can easily overwhelm you. They do lunge forward, which makes them scarier in numbers. Nemesis' first impression was so terrifying but so cool at the same time. The restraints over his entire body when he first gets unleashed gives off the impression he is truly a monster. A nice progression is that the more he is damaged throughout the story, the more his restraints are released, and his mutations grow more severe. Compared to Mr. X, he is a huge threat straight from the get-go. He uses ranged weapons, has a combo and grapples. Make distance from him and he will run at you. I have to say, seeing him run is panic-inducing. There is something so unnatural to see. He is relentless. The save rooms are back with more of the score that we have grown to love, but Capcom's decision to get rid of ink ribbons was disappointing. I would have liked, at least in difficulties above hardcore, they would bring ink ribbon system back. Autosaves also make this game too forgiving. Contrary to popular belief that action ruins Resident Evil, I have to disagree. You have to take into the account the character's context. We already got the super horror in Resident Evil 1 Remake for GameCube. In terms of narrative and the arsenal you are given, it is natural for the game to become more action oriented. As you, the player, get more experience in the tactics and combat from fighting zombies, dealing with traps and fighting bigger, badder BOWs, you would be shit scared with just a knife or a pistol with hardly any ammo. Eventually, the character's experience is reflected in your ability to now wield upgrades or more powerful weapons. Can you imagine retaining horror wielding a badass rocket launcher? No, horror doesn't work like that. Jill is now a veteran compared to the rookies of Resident Evil 2 Remake. Carlos went from real sleaze to a hero, with his own quirks and toned down sleaze fest. His 90s hairdo is replaced with this cool, shaggy style that fits him really well. Although being in a unit that is primarily of bad guys, he turns out to be a good guy with his own reason for joining. Nikolai is the real bad guy out of choice here. Sure, we got Nemesis, but he's a product of bad men and organizations like Umbrella. I'm really glad they didn't expand on his background too much, apart from knowing he is from Europe. The movie backstory can truly be forgotten now. Brad, I was kinda disappointed that after the mansion incident, they offed this guy so fast, like in the first 5 minutes his fate was sealed. Now, I know in the original, he gets wrecked by Nemesis. But in the remake, he could have put up more of a fight before he eventually meets his untimely demise. There aren't many survivors from the mansion incident, and so I would have liked the survivors to show that they've experienced hell and learned from it like Jill has. Mikhail shares with Carlos in that he is in a bad guy unit, but he redeems himself for a noble cause to help escape the survivors in the train. I wish there were more from the unit that we could have ran into. I'd like to note that even the side characters are given so much real depth. We have Nathaniel Bard, a doctor scientist working on the vaccine, but upon hearing a recording of what he's really like, it sours the whole ordeal. Humans can be disgusting to one another. Reusing assets, I don't see much of an issue with, except that it is done to save time, which is supposed to free up time to spend on generating more content, which wasn't here on release. Whether they wanted the base game out there and work on it for DLC, only Capcom knows. I've begun to trust Capcom again, and I'm happy to see that they are giving fans what they want, even if it's just a taste of it. I would have liked more locations throughout the city instead of revisiting places from Resident Evil 2 Remake. Heck, if they wanted to revisit, I still think it's a great idea, but maybe as an alternative route or utilize it as Easter eggs that link to Resident Evil 2 Remake. For example, we now know who blew up the shower room wall. We know who bit Marvin, but he immediately disappears when you enter the RPD. They could have expanded so much more on Carlos's section, such as when he first entered the city and encountered a zombie or BOW for the first time. Similar to Resident Evil 2 Remake, they should have made Carlos his own campaign. For old school fans, I still wish they would utilize the new engines to release an optional camera gameplay. One that uses the original fixed camera angles just for that extra nostalgia, and it would have made the game scarier. I hope they release more content in DLC, costumes, and even more weapons. There is so much more potential here to release more content. Trainers left for initial release, so we have to look forward. The next stage is DLCs. I hope they listen to their fans and release more.